Okay, we're going to get kicked off with our next session. Come on in. Okay, welcome to day 3 of PHX Startup Week 2021. We are going to talk about communicating in crisis. This is an important topic. As we all know, we're watching social every day and seeing lots of people and companies navigating through various crises. How do we communicate through it? These two experts are going to tell you today. We have Evie Carpenter here, Director of Content Marketing at Chassis, a local startup that's out of Galvanize, near and dear to our. You just bought a new building, right? Is that
We're
right?
out in Scottsdale now, but
now Scottsdale now.
Still love Galvanize.
Of course. So she's going to moderate Tami, Nealy, which we all know. Have fun, ladies.
Thank you so much. So as she said, I'm Evie Carpenter from Chassis, and today we are going to be talking about something that nobody really likes to talk about. So you've started a business, maybe you've taken that sales advice that you just heard, you're making a ton of money, and then the unthinkable happens. And your company's reputation is on the line, your company's future's on the line, all that revenue that you just made, how are you going to keep it? What do you do? So I'm going to be talking with Crisis Comms Pro, Tami Nealy, who is now the VP of Communications and Talent Relations at Find Your Influence. Just follow her advice, and by the end of this, when something happens, you'll just simply turn to your incident response plan. So thank you, Tami, for being here. And to kick things off, how did you find yourself in crisis communications in the first place?
Crisis communications isn't something that you plan for, it finds you. It seeks you out when you're not prepared. And so today I want to talk through how everybody, again, you just talked about how to make all this money. Crisis can take that away pretty quickly. So I want to help arm you with this kind of like Captain America shield, right? Just hold up your crisis plan and hopefully it stays away from you. But again, this isn't something that a lot of people really proactively think about until it hits you. And then you find yourself in the middle of crisis and you're like, where do I turn? Who do I talk to? Who needs to do what? And it's when you have this plan in place that you can effectively navigate through crisis and hopefully come out with minimal bruises.
Awesome. So just so that we're all on the same page, what is an incident response plan? We're kind of going back and forth between incident response, crisis communications. What's the difference there? But then what is this plan?
Yeah, so I've worked at a few different companies. Some have called it a crisis communications plan and some have called it an incident response plan. If you've printed it out and you're carrying it around, having the word crisis on it, someone sees you carrying that and that, rings all these alarm bells. So some people prefer to call it an incident response plan. There can be varying levels of incidents. They may not all be crisis, but you still need to respond to it. But to get back to the original question, what is it? It's a living, breathing document that really guides you and serves as a best practice for how to respond when various events may occur. That event may be, oh, the water main broke and our building is flooded. Everybody has to work from home. What's that plan? That's not shutting down, full operations. It's just relocating people. But then it could also be the death of an employee, a denial of service attack, a global pandemic, which, to be clear, I did not account for in any crisis response plan I had before 2020. But moving forward, I don't even think it needs to be in a crisis plan. Everybody just knows now what to do. So that's what the plan is. The plan is there to help leaders, those assigned communicators for the company, really understand what is going on, who is responsible to execute what when you find yourself in that situation needing to respond or to take action.
Awesome. And when is an instance that you have seen a company completely blow it, where they either didn't have a plan clearly, or they did not follow the plan, or something went horribly wrong?
So I love following the news to see when companies, I don't want to say I like to watch people have failures. I like to see how people respond in moments of crisis. And Evie, I know you and I spoke before, but today I present to you Cinnamon Toast Crunch. And funnily enough, the emoji on the back is exactly how I think they handled their latest, we're going to go ahead and call it a crisis. For those of you who don't know, in March, an individual posted on Twitter that he had poured his morning bowl of Cinnamon Toast Crunch, and in it he found shrimp tails. Not something you would expect to see in a box of Cinnamon Toast Crunch. Many people have shellfish allergies, so that could be an issue. So he posted a photo of it on his Twitter page. And since that posting, General Mills fumbled it so much that it became a New York Times story. It showed up in the Phoenix news. I'm sure it was memes. It was everywhere. Like, the story didn't originate in Phoenix. General Mills isn't located in Phoenix, but it became a story nationwide because of the fumble. So whether the gentleman who first reported it, there's some speculation out there whether he did find them. He's a comedian. I guess he has a reputation. Whether he's telling the truth or not does not determine how the brand should respond. And the brand fumbled. So I was watching it unfold kind of in real time. And it took about 24 hours, but I'm going to read a statement. This is the statement that Cinnamon Toast Crunch posted. While we are still investigating this matter, we can say with confidence that this did not occur at our facility. We are waiting for the consumer to send us the package to investigate further. Any consumers who notice their cereal box or bag has been tampered with, such as the clear tape that was found in this case, should contact us at 1-800, and then they put their phone number and logo. It took them 24 hours to come up with that. So that tells me that if they did have a crisis plan, they weren't following it, or maybe they didn't have a crisis plan. I don't know. But watching the whole thing unfold, they're going back and forth in public forum on Twitter with this person who supposedly found this. And now you've seen things spread on Twitter before. It was out of control. There was no way to put the cereal back in the box in this situation. It just kept spiraling. And when the New York Times calls, you found yourself in a situation that you likely don't want to be in. So I think they absolutely fumbled that. I have to believe, because General Mills is a publicly traded company, that they have a plan. They've been around for a while. They're not brand new on the scene like many of those folks who may be here today. So it was disappointing to watch it unfold, but my son is 16 now, and when he goes to college and studies crisis communication, I can guarantee this will be a case study that he will study one day.
Yep, Cinnamon Toast Shrimp is going to live on with us for quite some time, but are incident response plans just for companies that are the size of General Mills? Like what does that look like for a startup?
That's a great question. So where I first had crisis find me in my professional career, I was working for LifeLock, the local identity theft protection company. And we were a startup, but we were in hyper growth mode. And we found ourselves in a situation where we were being fined by the Federal Trade Commission and sued by 26 state attorneys general. And it was a moment where everyone's looking around of like, what are we going to say? What are we going to do? And again, crisis found us. It was in that moment that we navigated through that and said, we need to be better prepared next time, and thus move forward with creating a crisis communication plan and spelling out a bunch of scenarios. So yes, LifeLock is a huge company today, but when we found ourselves in that, we were still really in that startup mode. Another example of recent, also last month, there is a YouTuber. His name is David Dobrik. He's a vlogger, if you know that word, a video blogger. He makes millions of dollars a year creating content on YouTube. David had this idea to start this photo sharing app. It's not Instagram, but it's a photo sharing app. David went out and found all these investors, all of these, backers, people to get behind him. And then news broke that somebody in his vlog squad had allegedly raped a woman or done something without her consent. And David, being part of this group, had not stood up and said anything in support of her, or he had not done the right thing. He has since issued several apologies, but here he was starting this company, this technology social company. And at the end of the day, he had to walk away from that because investors were bailing. They said, we do not want to be affiliated with anything that he is affiliated with because it could impact the growth, their investment, all of this. So he walked away. I think some of those investors may have come back, but this is critical. yes, David Dobrik is a big like influencer kind of celebrity there, but whether you have that presence or not, anyone who you're affiliated with is whom is affiliated with your organization and does something that is illegal, gets arrested, anything like this, it affects your reputation. And when you're in this startup mode and you're just growing, and maybe you're going through your Series A, your Series B round, whatever it is, these other extracurricular people's behavior can impact your growth. So having a plan in place like this can really help you navigate those communications as you're trying to determine what is our best next step.
So what is that first step to creating this plan?
So the first step is to figure out what keeps you up at night. You are the CEO, the CFO, the COO. I don't really care what your role is. What keeps you up at night? Like, what are the risks that if this happens, this is going to sink us? You know, we just made all this money from the speaker we just heard before. Now we're like, okay, what are the biggest threats to our business right now? Is it a denial of service attack? Is it a rogue employee? You know, what could that be? I don't want to make that up. I don't know what anyone's business is out here right now, but come up with that. These are the things that are keeping me up at night, and then start working through that plan. Because, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but you don't have to say, okay, here's the 50 things that keep me up at night. You can't tackle 50 things. What is that first most pressing thing? Tackle that. Let's just handle it in micro steps here. And then once you do this scenario, okay, what's the next scenario? And then I would also encourage you to kind of build a priority matrix. When you ask me what is an incident response plan, this is a 72-page document of one that I've created. And one thing that I find helpful, forgive the post-it notes to get me to this page, is kind of this issues matrix. Okay, like what is the severity? What is the likelihood that this is going to happen? Really think that through. Likely what's keeping you up at night is the incidents that are high in severity and high in likelihood. Let's start there in the matrix and then work our way down to the low likelihood, low severity, because those higher likelihood, higher severity ones, those are going to take those dollars out of that bank account that you just made. So let's try to work backwards through that matrix and solve it that way. But I think what's really important is to bring everybody to the conversation. So it is the CEO, it is the CFO, it is the chief operating officer, the chief technology officer. Who are these leaders over different functions of the business? Because they're all kept up at night about something different. Let's not assume everybody's, oh, I'm most concerned about a denial of service attack because that's what the CTO is concerned about. What is everyone concerned about? And then let's prioritize and figure out how we're going to back in and build those plans out.
So when you're in a startup, you have a zillion things to do at any second of the day. And sitting down and thinking through these worst case scenarios, I don't know about you, but that is definitely not high on my priority list. But is it worth it for a company that's just getting started to really dedicate the time to doing this?
I think it is. I think of it like an insurance plan, right? I have insurance on my car. Knock on wood, I haven't been in a car accident. I have insurance on my home. My home hasn't burned down, but it's there. It's that security blanket to know that if something happens, someone's going to take care of me. With your crisis communication plan, your incident response plan, someone's going to take care of you. You're involved in that, but you have a team of people who are going to rally and they're going to say, we have some semblance of a game plan of what we're going to do, because the crisis isn't going to show up and say, hey, turn to page 8, let's begin executing here. The crisis is going to show up in a way you didn't plan. But if you have some idea of the plan, you're like, oh, I can figure my way through this, instead of saying, where do I even start?
So once you have those, maybe let's say top 2 or 3 likely scenarios that could happen, you've had a mini panic attack, you've calmed down, then what do you do with this plan?
You have to practice that plan. The New England Patriots didn't show up in the Super Bowl year after year after year because they practiced the same way everyone else did. They put in the extra work. And I really don't know why I picked the New England Patriots, I guess, because they're kind of a dynasty. Sorry about that if I'm offending any other NFL fans, but it's like anything else. It's not like any other muscle. You have to flex it. You have to practice doing it. And what practice doing it means isn't like, oh, I hope a crisis shows up next week Thursday because I'm free. You have to have one person who's in charge of this plan. And that person, maybe you decide it's quarterly. I think quarterly is the best practice. If you're practicing this once a year, that's not practice. But there's one person who's in charge of scheduling the crisis and doesn't tell anyone else. And the reason that's important is because, again, crisis is not waiting to make sure that your investor call is done or you're done entertaining these clients who are visiting from out of town. Crisis shows up, you always have something else going on. So you want to rehearse, you want to walk through these crisis situations. You want to do it within your plan. You're going to have, okay, here are the key stakeholders, but for every stakeholder, you're going to have a backup person because those stakeholders, they go on vacation, they are sick, they have to go to a kid's play or baseball game or whatever it is. So a great plan has a lead person in every role and a backup person in every role. So when you're executing this, execute it when the CFO's out of town, he's out of the country, or he's on an airplane, or she, excuse me. But do it in a way where everybody feels like they're playing the role, that they're practicing, they're flexing that muscle. And then just like if it was a real crisis, a real incident that you're responding to, have a after event plan review. So how did we handle this? What could we learn? Because if you're not constantly updating that plan, that plan is no good to you. So you want to practice working through different incidents, and then you want to practice that after action review of what could we have done better. Oh, wow, I didn't realize that I should have kept Evie in the loop on this piece. I need to put that in the plan. So in the future, I can follow through here because Evie needs to communicate that to A, B, C, D, E. So it's important to practice the plan, and then after every event, review it together and where can you improve moving forward.
I love that. It's almost like a fire drill where you just have to be ready to go whenever crisis comes. And when we were talking through planning out this session, you mentioned a story about driving back from Vegas. And I'm wondering if you can share that.
Yeah, you mentioned exactly a fire drill. You don't know when that's coming, but you practice fire drills in your office. Kids practice fire drills at school. They practice lockdown drills. So practice, practice, practice. Yes, I worked for an organization, not LifeLock, but I worked for an organization that in the crisis plan, we had a denial of service attack happen. And I was like, oh, I've got that in the plan. I know what to do. But I was driving back from Las Vegas. I was taking a vacation with my family. And for those of you who have driven from Vegas back to Phoenix, you know that there's some dead spots where you don't get any coverage. Well, the folks back in the office were managing the plan and they were calling me. And then phone service died. And I'm telling my husband, drive as fast as you can. Like as soon as I get service, we're pulling over. And so, there we are on the side of the road in the desert. And I'm on my phone where I finally have service, helping to manage through that plan, but also saying, I think you have it for the next hour. We're going to keep driving. I'll keep checking in on email. But again, that fire drill didn't wait until I had phone service. I could have been on an airplane and been unreachable. So again, having those backup plans and everyone knowing what their role is in the plan, because if the person who's the center point for executing the plan is not available, you can't tell the crisis, hey, can you just give us like an hour until Tami gets the service? That'll be great. That's when it gets bigger and it gets bigger and it becomes, could get to the point of being out of control if you don't handle it with the folks that you have available in that moment.
So you're talking about kind of a chain of command in that plan. What else should be in there? I know that obviously there are some written statements that maybe a company like Cinnamon Toast Crunch did not follow when they were responding on Twitter, but what are kind of the key elements of those plans?
So that's a great question. And now I'm flipping through to the next page that's marked in my plan. So forgive the noise that I'm not here already. But, one event that I have here is like a security or data breach. So we've all seen, whether it's Facebook or Netflix or your bank, like you get an email that says, hey, your data has been compromised. We just wanted to let you know this happened on June 1st, 2018. And you're like, oh, cool. It's 2021. I'm so glad I can do anything about that. So in this plan, for each type of scenario or incident that you're outlining, you want to have, okay, here's actions. Here's what everyone's role is. Everyone has a role. So whether that be the CFO is in charge of reaching out to investors, the CTO is in charge of reaching out to, I don't know, whoever technology forums they reach out to. I'm sorry, I'm not prepared to answer that question right now, but everybody is responsible for communicating to a set audience, and that is defined per incident. You have in here all these key stakeholders in your plan. So whoever identifies this first has to escalate it and tell the one person who's in charge. And then that person who's in charge has to tell these people. And then you assemble in a war room or a virtual war room like this on Zoom, but you keep it open where people can, I can mute my conversation here and go over here and take a call with who I have to, then I can come in and unmute and check back in with whoever the commander is in here, and they're checking things off the list and making sure, assigning responsibilities and tasks, and they're following the plan. They're making sure the plan is getting executed and people are checking back in. But yes, you mentioned there are like a drawer statement. And so that comes from all of my communications background. The first time I found myself in a crisis, I logged in, I opened up a Word document and I was like, okay, I have to write a statement. And I'm staring at a blank white screen and I don't even know where to begin. Like, oh, and you're in this moment and your anxiety is high, your adrenaline is going and you don't know where to start. So a drawer statement is something like, in this example of Cinnamon Toast Crunch, on date, on insert date, the organization found insert scenario. You know, we are currently working to investigate blank. We will report back within X hours. So you're just kind of filling it in and you're giving yourself a starting point. And so what's so important about that is there's so many different audiences you have to communicate with. Again, it's your employees, it's your shareholders, it's your investors, it's so many different people, and everyone's responsible for communicating differently. But the problem is, I don't want the social media team going and saying one thing and then us telling the shareholders something different and the employees something different. It has to be the same message. And in crisis, you have to tell the truth and tell it fast. You're going to say that truth and you're going to keep saying that truth over and over and over again. If you don't tell the truth, you're creating another level of crisis for yourself. You have to manage your way out of some lie that you've told. And what I found to be most effective is you don't want to be sitting here executing in a crisis and then having your phone ringing with all these people being, what am I going to hear from you again? When am I going to hear from you again? What's going on? But if you say in those statements, we are currently investigating, we will provide our next update at 4 p.m. You better have that update at 4 p.m. or those emails are going to come through. You can't be responding to all that when you need to focus on what's in front of you. And I know, like you, Evie, and I'm sure everyone watching, we've all dealt with businesses or brands where like communication wasn't ideal. And you're like, what's going on? So for me, in the absence of communication, I just think you're not like, you've forgotten about me. Like the issue's over. I ordered these glasses online and they weren't here for 3 weeks. And I'm messaging them. I'm like, hey, what's going on with the shipping? I don't know what's going on. Because in the absence of any communication telling me there was a delay or anything, I didn't know what was happening. And so you want to keep your stakeholders, your audience, your employees up to speed on what's going on. So if you say you're going to communicate at 4 p.m., you don't start thinking about your message at 3:30. You start thinking about your message the minute you sent that last message. What can I learn? How can I start building this next message? And that keeps you on top of it. That's building trust and confidence that, hey, we know there's an issue. We're working to solve it. We don't want to give you incorrect information. So as we validate truths, we'll share that as we learn it, but you don't want continued misinformation out there.
So in that plan so far, we've said you have that chain of command, you know, everyone who needs to be involved, you've got your templates, and then you have that cadence of communication too. Anything else?
I think, again, you have to continue to update it. And I don't mean just the after action events. If your COO leaves the company and you have a new COO come in, you need to update that document with office phone numbers, cell phone numbers. No one has a pager, so that's not even relevant. Email, like a personal email, like all these backup ways to communicate with somebody. And then again, you don't have to just say, okay, it's time to work through the new plan because this person's into the company. The owner of the plan needs to sit down and say, let's review this together. Everyone else has reviewed it. This important part of your onboarding process, because if I don't walk you through this, we're sure to need you to execute it before you know it. So let's bring that up as soon as possible with new stakeholders when they join the organization.
So you just mentioned the owner of the plan, and you've been talking about kind of CTO, COO, COO. A lot of times startups don't have those roles yet, or maybe one person is handling a lot of those different roles. So in that case, if you have a small team, who should be the owner of this plan?
That's a great question. And so what I would recommend, because I've been in organizations where I've been that director of communication, so it's often been me. But if you don't have that central point of communications, who would you put on camera? Who would you put on camera if 12 News came out to talk to you about what happened? That's the person who should own it. And I say that because that person, when they're being interviewed by a reporter, whether it's on camera, whether it's off camera, they're going to be asked questions. And if they say, I don't know, that's not a good look, right? You want someone who's that center point of the communications. And that's generally put that person on camera. So if you say, oh, my CFO is not comfortable being on camera, he or she's doesn't feel comfortable being a spokesperson, eliminated. Okay, who could we put out there who as the face of the company in this crisis? And it has to be someone who can be calm, cool, and collected when the camera's on. I mean, camera's off and you can have a mini panic attack, if you will, but I would recommend having your spokesperson be that person who owns the plan until maybe you get to that point of having a full-time communication person on staff. What I wouldn't say, if you're working with an agency, you're like, oh, we have a PR agency, just have them do it. No. You want someone representing the organization, because if you say, oh, the news source isn't going to want to talk to the PR agency. They're happy to talk to the person who's in-house with the organization, but just think how far removed that PR agency is. They're not in the war room. They don't know everything that's going on. So to really ensure that trust and credibility, you want it to be somebody within your organization.
That makes a lot of sense. And so do business leaders need a different plan per crisis or incident, or is it kind of a one size fits all, just plug and play, whatever happens to go wrong?
Another good question. So in this plan here, I would say there are probably 25 to 35 different scenarios that are in here. So the scenarios are broken out. So I mentioned a denial of service attack. It could be a sexual harassment claim. It could be a death of an employee. It could be corporate malfeasance. It could be, or a water pipe breaking. You know what I mean? Like all these different things can impact you. Again, some are higher severity in impacting your brand and your reputation, and some are lower, but you still need to be prepared. How are we going to handle this? So like I mentioned before, getting your leadership group together. What keeps you up at night? What are your biggest concerns? What could go wrong? Put those together and then say, okay, let's prioritize these. How are we going to work through these? What plan do we need to create first? And that plan can just be 2 pages. Okay, if this happens, here's the point person. This person then tells this person. These person's responsibilities break out this way. And it's just kind of a responsibility tree, if that's a word. But you don't be so overwhelmed with like, oh, where do I start? Where do you start? Let's start as the conversation. Start as saying, okay, how do we work through this? And don't say, okay, we're going to start this conversation on April 28th. We need to have our communication plan done by May 28th. Okay, in a month, you're still running a business, right? You're still out there trying to grow that money that the last speaker was talking about. You're really trying to bring that in. And if you just stop doing all that and focus on your price plan, that's not what I'm saying here. What I'm saying is it is a priority on your list, but it's not your only priority. And I understand that. And I'm not here to say, hey, every entrepreneur out there, stop what you're doing and come up with a crisis plan in a month. It takes time. But if you're working through it, you're going to see that it becomes easier with each scenario.
What is one of the most common mistakes you've seen businesses make while they're making the plan? So not the absence of a plan, but in the plan, what's a common mistake?
So I think a common mistake is not practicing the plan and not keeping it current. So if this plan was created in June of 2020, it's not current. So people have different phone numbers, and there's, like, how are you keeping this current? How are you practicing it? After every after action event review that you do, there's something that can be updated. There's something new that you've learned in here. This plan, when this was created, in its initial form was probably 2010. Instagram wasn't a thing then. It was just launching in 2010. So in the beginning, social media wasn't even a consideration here. So, as you're building this out, you need to account for all of your social media handles and platforms. And, who knows, like Clubhouse has just come out in the last year. How does your plan include how you're going to respond on Clubhouse, that platform? So it needs to constantly be evolving, because if you set it and forget it, then it's worthless to you. All the time and energy that you put into it, it's not current. And your passports expire, your driver's license, everything expires. There's an expiration date on your crisis response plan too, and make sure that the state, whomever you've designed as the owner of this plan, make sure that part of their annual review is, okay, how many times did you update the plan this year? Like, set a goal that you need to be touching this. The owner should be reviewing it at least once a month, just eyes on it, like, hey, what's changed? What do I need to consider here? Because as I mentioned, you can learn from Cinnamon Toast Crunch, so you don't have this reaction. But I'm curious with General Mills, is it something that they're practicing? Is it now something that they're going to practice moving forward? So setting it and forgetting it is a really big mistake.
So I'm glad that you brought our friends at Cinnamon Toast Crunch back up. I'm curious, if you were in charge of that scenario with crisis comms, what would you have done differently? Can you walk us through?
Yes. So when you see, I think this started with a social media manager or social media strategist, whoever was responsible for responding to tweets that day. And maybe it was multiple people. When they saw that first thing, instead of responding, they should have gone to their manager to say, this is abnormal. What do I do? And that manager, director, whatever, should have said, hey, I probably don't know what to do either. We should escalate. It should have just been escalated instead of responding. And I can't even tell you what the initial response was. I think it was like, hey, that's just sugar. Like, sometimes sugar gets caked on. Like, I'm not an idiot, but I know what shrimp tails look like, and they were shrimp tails. Whether they came in the box or not, like, I'm not here to debate that. But the response was, that's just sugar. Nope, because now you're calling your consumer a liar. And that's not good for business, right? Oh my goodness, I'm sorry this happened. Hey, let us investigate this more, would have been a better response. But if I was guiding this plan, something comes in and it's not normal what you see every day, elevate that conversation, move it up, move it up. This, I think, should have gone to CMO and legal counsel, like, hey, what do we do in this situation? And whether they were on airplanes or whether they were on vacation or regardless, everyone should have a backup plan. And so what I saw unfold here did not look to me like they did that. I'm not saying they didn't do it. Their reaction and response looked to me as if they didn't do it. And one of the things that I said before is tell the truth and tell it fast. It took 24 hours to get that statement that I read earlier to you at the beginning. And even then, I was a little bit put off by it because they said, we're absolutely certain this didn't happen at our facility. Okay, so in 24 hours, you confirmed, like, I don't know how you confirmed that. Tell me how you confirmed that. Like, now I feel like you're just putting us on the defense of like, really, what's going on? And so I would have handled it differently. I would have escalated the conversation. I would have made sure that the response that came back didn't put the consumer or anybody on the defense, but to say, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry this happened, period. Whether it was their fault or not, start with an I'm sorry. I don't remember seeing an apology or an I'm sorry anywhere in there. Just start with I'm sorry. Whether it's your fault or not, that's what people want to hear.
Interesting, because I've also heard that some companies live by the rule of never say sorry, because then you're admitting fault, and legally then you can be held responsible. But you would say just apologize, admit that fault.
That's my moral compass of just trying to settle a situation of like, I'm sorry this happened to you, period. Let us investigate and see what happened. I did look quickly last night. I was multitasking and cooking dinner, so I didn't spend a ton of time, but I looked at the day that this tweet first came out and General Mills stock price, and it went down. I mean, it's since gone back up. So it's in the grand scheme of their Q1 investor call that they maybe have had this month or is coming up. I don't think they have a ton of explaining to do because the market has rebounded from it. But I certainly hope they can look at it as an opportunity to say, wow, what could we do differently next time? And I felt gross buying the cereal as a prop, but I mean, the fact that this is the emoji on the back, like, I feel like these should be pulled from all shelves. Like, it's the color of a shrimp, like, just nothing sits well with me about this box.
Did you check your box for shrimp tails?
I didn't yet. I'm very, very afraid. Maybe I'll just return it to the grocery store this weekend and pretend like it never happened.
So if any business leaders who are listening are looking for maybe some templates or some help with creating their plan, where can they turn?
Yeah, so backing up, I didn't say this in the beginning. Today I work for Find Your Influence, which is an influencer marketing company. It has nothing to do with crisis communication, so I do kind of want to separate church and state there a little bit. This isn't what I do every single day, but I've done it before, and it's in my head. Like, when crisis finds you, again, you don't go looking for it. You become a quote unquote expert because you've kind of been through a series of crises before. So, I would be happy to consult and speak with anyone who's listening today. You can find me on LinkedIn. It's Tami Nealy, TamiNealy. I'd be happy to, have a conversation with you and point you in the right direction to get started.
Awesome. So I think we will open it up for Q&A now.
Hello, ladies.
Hello.
Cinnamon shrimp. I don't know. Coconut shrimp. We have a couple of questions. Let's ask them now. One, what are your thoughts on marketing managers using these kinds of social media wars as a ploy to create interest? No publicity is bad publicity kind of thinking.
I think as long as you're not trying to call someone out for being a liar, or you're not trying to change your product or alter it in a way that it shouldn't be showing up, as long as no one's getting hurt by it, I can't imagine a situation, maybe what you're talking about, but there's some burger wars going on right now on social media where I think it's Wendy's or Burger King are kind of going back and forth about, we've got the best burger and all this, and they're all responding to everybody, and it's fun and it's jovial, and it's there's no one's getting hurt in that. But in this situation, I think what happened is Cinnamon Toast Crunch told a user, you're lying, this didn't happen to you, that's not what you're seeing, and then continued the conversation going back and forth in a public forum, not just in direct messages, not in email, in a public forum on Twitter for the world to see. And Twitter has started so many fires. I mean, Cinnamon Toast Crunch is the most recent one that I'm aware of, but I'm sure since March 22nd, when this happened, there have probably been 8 or 10 other type of brands who have been called out on Twitter for something that they did. So I'm not sure if that quite answered the question.
Evie, what's your opinion?
I think there's a fine line between using something that's timely to help your own brand and then crossing over into the territory that Tami was just talking about. And that in this case, I think you can walk that line a little bit more with Cinnamon Toast Crunch. Like, really, no one was harmed, but in other scenarios, you wouldn't touch it. It's really a judgment call. But if you were to poke fun a little bit at maybe someone telling their customer that they're a liar or something like that in a tweet, I wouldn't necessarily do an entire campaign around it. But if you tie it into a timely tweet or something like that, I think that's, I'd say that's fair game.
I have a question. There's a lot of sensitive topics going on in our country at the moment. And I'm thinking specifically about last year around the murder of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement. And there were a bunch of companies that came out and advocated for their position on the matter. And those that didn't say anything got equal attention. What's your thought on that, and how, and then I guess the second part of the question is kind of piggybacking off the first, is marketing and PR communications. What's the good mix there, in a plan?
That's a good question. So yes, many companies did come out and say, this is our plan. This is how we're addressing diversity, racial injustice, whether it be, we're giving employees time off to mourn and grieve and process and figure out their action plan. And then the companies who didn't respond, who didn't say anything, maybe it wasn't just, they weren't saying, we're not interested in that, we're gonna pretend it didn't happen. Maybe they were being thoughtful, but in the absence of saying something, again, people are like, oh, they don't care, all of this. So maybe a statement, even on, Instagram, it's just a screen grab, or Twitter, or whatever platform, of like, hey, we want to be thoughtful about this. We don't want to be reactionary. We're thinking through what our plan is, but then stick to that plan. That plan can't just be like a Band-Aid for that moment. We hope no one asks us again about it. Here's our plan for now, and then we're going to table it and not really follow through. So follow through with that plan. Anything that you say publicly, follow through on what you say you're going to do.
I would piggyback on top of that and just make sure that whatever you do say is authentic. It's not just saying things like Tami said, you can't just make a statement and then drop it and never come back. It has to be true to who you are as an organization. And if that means that you have to come together as an organization and say, you know what, we don't really have anything to say right here, and this is a problem. So let's make some changes internally. Let's get some programs in place, and then let's keep the public up to date on what we're doing to change how we were before.
Yeah, I can think of a lot of examples of, because the company brand and the employee values, right, or the values of the company and the employee experience. I can think of a lot of examples of employees that reached out to me and said, wow, my company isn't standing for this. They haven't said anything. They haven't done anything, or they have, and I am translating this as a train wreck of a situation. I don't want to attach my brand to this. And there being some reactionary decisions about that. So it's very important. Our second question is, we used a FMEA, failure mode error analysis framework, for our tech products. Do you recommend a more holistic framework to create and follow for your crisis plan? Is there any industry solutions that you recommend?
Can you tell me one more time what that acronym stands for? I'm not familiar.
Yep, it's FMEA, failure mode error analysis.
Okay. If that's just on the technology side of things, that's a great start. You're just addressing the different scenarios that could impact your technology. Think beyond that. So is it a rumor or product defect that you need to respond to? Is it, did your very public CEO get pulled over for a DUI? There's so many different scenarios. I think that's a fantastic start if you have that. And again, I'm not saying like the DUI case is something that makes sense for every organization, but like, think broadly. What are we not thinking about is often what you're going to get caught with. Again, I didn't have a global pandemic or a pandemic of any sort in this plan. And, I'd be shocked to find many agencies, large or small, who did. But I think what you're describing there is an unbelievable first start. And it might get you 3/4 of the way through your crisis plan, but I want you to think broader than just the technology piece itself.
And I'd say also, if you're struggling to kind of think through those more broad people-based potential crises, talk to your family and friends. Just have conversations. Sometimes when you're in a startup or you're just a business leader in general, you get so laser focused on things. You're like, okay, got the tech all covered. But like Tami said, there's this whole other area that unfortunately things can go wrong in. And sometimes you just need to broaden your perspective a little bit to see those.
One thing that I have in this plan, again, created this scenario back in 2010, and then several companies later, I worked for a company where we had an employee who passed away, and my brain kicked in. I was like, I have a plan for that. I know what to do. And so when the CEO and the legal counsel came to me and told me, I said, hang on a second, I have a plan for this. And my first question was, who knows? We need to get the people who know in a single room. And so it's not spreading. This isn't gossip. People aren't hearing about it. We need to figure out, number one, we need to fact check, is this the truth? Did this really happen? Or are we going to say something that isn't true? Who is verifying this? And then from there, how do we tell that person's manager first? How do we tell that team that she was involved with first? And how do we tell a larger company? And we know how people are going to respond to this. The grief is going to be overwhelming. Are they going to be able to drive home? So then it's coordinating Ubers to make sure that they can Uber home, and then we can Uber them back to work when they feel ready to come back to get their vehicle. So it's a whole logistical list about like, how are we going to get people from point A to point B? Like when you think an employee dies, thinking about considering Ubers may not be on your list, but you have to figure out how are people going to respond to this? We want business to move forward, but if they can't move forward that day because of their emotions, there's nothing wrong with that. We need to figure out how to get them away from the office. So those who do feel comfortable staying here and working and kind of putting pause on their emotions and working for the rest of the day, how they can be not interrupted. So again, not something that I would have ever wanted to work through, but I was like, oh, I have a plan for that. I know what to do. And I was able to kind of turn to that and help that guide me.
So how long does it take to create an incident response plan?
Your whole career. No, again, depends on the number of scenarios you want to really include in your plan. I think you first start out with, okay, what is our issues priority matrix that I showed, starting with severity and likeliness, and then build out from there those incidents. In the plan, you have to say, Kate owns the plan. Kate is one who is going to communicate to everybody how this works. You have to assign ownership, responsibilities. You have to treat it like a phone book where you've got, all the contact information in there. It can take a couple months to really get it started, to really build it out. But again, like I said, if it's not something that you're going back to on a regular basis, then you've wasted your time in the beginning. So I think you can have a crisis plan up and running that helps you feel good within 2 months. If you wanted to stop everything else that's on your plate, just put it all to the side and just focus on that. Obviously, you can do it a lot quicker, but you have a business to run, and this can't be your only priority.
We got a question. Can you explain to the audience the importance of the role of a legal counsel in these issues?
Absolutely. They're very, very important in these issues. How you respond, how you say things, you can be held accountable for. And your legal team needs to say, I believe I can hold you accountable for saying these things. Any claims that you make, any regard to service delivery, you're going to be held to that. And so you want to run everything by your legal team. A lot of people have the impression that the legal team slows everything down and, nothing moves quickly because the legal team's involved. When you're in a crisis, you can say, I'm going to go forward at 4 p.m. with this statement. Do you approve it or not? 4 p.m. is my deadline. You have until 4 p.m. to approve this statement. I'm going forward with this statement. They know how much work is on their plate to kind of undo that mess that you might be creating. And so they're more receptive to that deadline and saying, okay, I'm stopping everything I'm doing. I'm giving you my full attention, full stop. Here's how we're going to handle this together. Every organization that I've worked with, I've been fortunate to have legal counsel on staff and have rehearsed this plan regularly with them.
Awesome. Let's see, any more questions? This is last call on the questions for PR. How do you come up with all the risks? That was your matrix was helpful, but I can sit here and go doomsday scrolling and come up with a lot of risks. So what do we do?
So it's really what's keeping you up at night? What if you're like, oh my gosh, if this happens, like what's in the back of your head? Like, we can't afford for this to happen. Start there and then work your way out of that. Like, okay, what are some other industries or other organizations in our space? What have they faced? And then even think about a cereal brand. You're not a cereal brand, but look back through, you can Google like, how do businesses respond in crisis? And you're going to get a series of case studies that show up. Learn from what other people did. Social media is your best friend and your biggest risk in the same breath. So I think to start, you need to come up with the issues that are keeping you up at night that could be paralyzing to your business. What is going to shut you down, lose all that money that you just earned from the speaker beforehand? What is going to shut business down? Start there.
Great. Evie Carpenter of Chassis, Tami Nealy of Find Your Influence. Thank you so much for your education and your time today. We appreciate you. Thank you so much.